Welcome to What She Does, the podcast that takes you inside the working lives of everyday women shaping the world around us. I'm Leanne Starr.
And I'm Annie Sinzinger. And each week, we sit down with someone who shows us not just what she does, but how and why she does it. Plus, find out if you fit the same mold to grab the same type of gig. Let's discover
What She Does, starting now.
Our guest this week grew up in Bardstown, Kentucky, the bourbon capital of the world, earned a civil engineering degree from the University of Alabama, and then followed the pull of her roots straight into the world of whiskey. Today, she operates two companies, Liquid Assets, a bourbon barrel investment and consulting company, and BRBN Storage, a whiskey barrel warehouse. She may only be 28 years old, but she is already reshaping how people think about tangible asset investing.
So today we have Morgan Salsman who's joining us. Hi, Morgan.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yes, hello. And she is from Liquid Assets. And I have lots of questions about Liquid Assets. Tell me a little bit about how this started. And because you were, I think, previously an engineer.
Yes, yep. My background in civil engineering was what I went to school for, but while I was in school, I got the opportunity to start investing in whiskey barrels.
Mm.
And I grew up in Bardstown, Kentucky, which is the bourbon capital of the world, and so been around it my whole life, and I had some family and friends that were doing it for fun. They were significantly older than me, but, they had some money to spend and went and bought some whiskey barrels, and they learned that barrels are tangible assets that appreciate in value over time, and they invited me to join them. And so that's where I got my start. A lot of the time I was building my own business, I was still at my engineering job, which paid the bills and taught me a lot of problem solving skills.
And so I have to ask, do you like whiskey?
I do. I
Oh,
do. It's interesting to me though because it's more of a nostalgic and, like, heritage-based love for whiskey than even, like, the profile. Like, I know a lot about whiskey, but it's just something that hits really close to home for me, and it feels very comforting and, homey. But I do drink other things too. But I love a good old-fashioned and love a good glass of bourbon on the rocks.
tell me a little bit about, so we know how you got into it, but what was so interesting to you about whiskey barrel keeping?
Well, for me, at the ripe old age of 21, I was really intrigued by the ability to participate in almost like a private equity-esque opportunity
Mm.
without being at the time, I didn't even know what it was, but without being an accredited investor. So, we had the opportunity to I think I put in like $5,000 or something like that when I first started, and the gentleman that was working with were putting in significantly more than that. I was the smallest investor, I was the youngest investor, but I was learning, and I was really intrigued by the financial aspect of dealing with assets, of handling money, almost like trading commodity-like investments. And I didn't have a finance background, I had the engineering background, and sometimes I look back and wonder if that's what I should have done. But I think engineering gave me amazing problem-solving skills that I wouldn't have gotten from the financial world maybe, but I feel like I've learned a lot about the finance world just by living my life and building a business and things of that nature. So, really for me, what intrigued me was the financial cycle of a whiskey barrel, and then also how unique it was and how that attached, like, to my own heritage. It was just something that was super cool to me, and I got a little bit obsessed with it when I learned about it.
I'm just wondering because, we started with sort of like the liquid assets part of the company, but you have a sister company too, which is like bourbon barrel storage. So they kind of like go hand in hand in terms of like your business. Can you talk a little bit about what happens in the bourbon barrel warehouse?
Yeah, so and maybe we should back up and talk a little bit about how those businesses intertwine. So there's two companies that we have. We have liquid assets and then we have BRB storage. And really the reason that they're separated is because there's varied ownership. Liquid assets, I own and operate completely myself, sole founder, sole operator. I have two partners on the warehousing side at BRB storage. And so they're very intertwined. We store all of our barrels that we buy from LQD assets, BRB storage. And so, it's a family of businesses. They operate very well together. And they're two silos of my business. The third area that we haven't necessarily touched on is the consulting side.
Mm.
So we actually do build, curate, and develop whiskey brands, handle all their logistics, co-packing, cost of goods management, all of that kind of stuff. So they really do complement each other pretty well. It's great for us on our investment fund side to be able to have control over our storage facility. It's great for accessibility. It's great for pricing control. It's great for just knowing what's going on with your inventory when you in this day and age when we have so much digital business that we do, it's nice to know exactly who's managing your barrels, exactly who the operators are, and what's going on at the warehouse. And a day at the warehouse is honestly pretty simple. Most of the time when a truck comes in, the barrels get put away and they stay in the same spot until they're ready to leave and get put in a bottle. Now you do have days where you come in and you pull some samples and maybe you move some barrels around in order to pick out a specific barrel off the stack, or if you have a client that, is moving them somewhere else, they're putting it in a bottle, something along those lines. We do have some movement there. And then we're also this summer going to be adding services to do like rebarreling projects, which is where, you might dump all the barrels into a tote, put them into a new finishing barrel or something along those lines, which is a little bit more activity that would be happening at the warehouse as well. But it's pretty simple. I mean, it's almost like a self storage facility where, you're renting the space, you're storing your stuff there, and it sits there until you're ready to come back and get it.
And can you tell me a little bit about, I mean, I realize your day probably changes, like, your week is not the same
Mhm.
beginning to end, but what does a day look like for you?
Yeah, so each of my days throughout the week are quite different, and I do try to structure them pretty pretty regularly. My Tuesdays are always booked with client meetings. That's like where I have my reoccurring clients. I get on, give them updates about the projects we're doing. So I have a scheduled time for that. That's really probably my densest days are my client days. I have other days that I set aside that are more for execution of the work. It's ensuring that production's in line. It's getting our samples for glassware, for labels, for caps, boxes, any, product product things that we need to do. And then I have other days where, I'm managing our investment fund and I'm selling our barrels out of that. And I am building relationships with these brands, helping them, plan out their production to ensure that over the next 6 months, they've got enough inventory and they've got enough lead time to be able to put, the product in the bottle before their distributors are knocking on their door asking for more inventory. Um, and then I guess the third thing would be the management of the warehouse, so
Mhm.
having barrels come in and out. Logistics, a lot of that, a lot of spreadsheets. I find myself in spreadsheets pretty frequently. So that's the majority of my time. And then I have a little window every week that I work on like social media and, the marketing side of things. I try to keep that window small, but it definitely takes a lot of time.
I'm curious, what do you have to do as far as marketing for
So for me, it's picking out the events that we're going to attend, what conferences we're going to go to. A lot of my marketing I do through social media. I use my website as well, updating that with, new events, awards, and networking too. I do a lot of networking through LinkedIn and through local events for, I try to focus on high net worth individuals or consumers, um, depending on which area I'm looking to kind of grow at that time. But unfortunately, I can't do it all at once. So I do have to be very, very cognizant with my calendar of what are my responsibilities? What am I focusing on today? And, sometimes it gets away from you, but even having a plan in place really does help you stay in line.
there are, variables in the industry. I know Canada, sort of put a ban on all American whiskey sales. And I'm sure that must have had an impact on you, but maybe it didn't because this part of your business is storing whiskey as opposed to moving it.
So, yes, there have been quite a few, you know, headwinds that we've experienced in the industry. Definitely one of them is this tiff we have with Canada. They've definitely been one of our biggest exporters for many, many years, and the tariff war, I think, turned them off a little bit. And I understand, relations between countries can get challenging. And yes, pulling that inventory off the shelf definitely has affected a lot of brands. I think they have since, nullified the tariff, but they're still a little bit hesitant to put the product back on the shelves. And so I think that's like a rebuilding relationships thing that's going to have to happen. And it's no shock. It's happened many times before that whiskey gets in the middle of these tariff wars, unfortunately. And it's just something that we have to deal with. And it's one of those things a little bit out of our control. All we can do is do our best with it. And that's not the only place that's experiencing the tariff war. We're also having the same thing in Europe and, India and China. And there is definitely a challenge when it comes to exporting. Luckily for me specifically, I'm still a pretty small fish in this pond. And so most of my business is domestic. So although it doesn't necessarily directly affect me, it does affect my competitors and it affects where they're giving their attention and where, their dollars are going in terms of marketing, advertising, and where their inventory goes. So, like I said, it may not directly affect me, but it affects those around me, which secondarily does affect the way that we can operate as well.
One of the domestic issues is that may affect you is younger people aren't drinking as much as they used to, like other generations. So I'm sure that impacts your business as well, or even how you consult your businesses on, what to do.
Yes, definitely so. And I think the younger generation is very focused on experiences. And so the goal that I have with the brands that I work with is like, how do you connect with these people? It's a very different approach than it's ever been in the past. And so that's kind of the strategy that I take with my brands in order to kind of capture that environment. Whiskey is also traditionally consumed by older people. That's always been the case. It's an acquired taste. And so I don't necessarily think that the whiskey category is affected as much by the younger generation not drinking. I think it's more affected by the lack of disposable income that people have nowadays. And Gen
Mm.
Z definitely falls into that category. But the disposable income is, if you don't have any money to spend, you're definitely not going to be spending it on going out and, drinking or going to a bar. Like you're going to spend it on your necessities. And so that is, I think, a big shift that we've experienced as well, which is just something we're seeing in the economy as a whole. I will also add that the stats currently show that Gen Z is considered late adopters of alcohol, and I do think that that is in part to so many young people turning 21 in the middle of COVID, and so they weren't going out to the bars. They weren't going and having fun with their friends. Even in college those years, they weren't out and about. They weren't having these social experiences that typically are around alcohol, so they didn't maybe pick up that habit. However, the statistics are showing that even though they're late adopters, they're fast adopters. And so,
Mhm.
you know, they are picking up pace, which is good. And a lot of Gen Z is still under the age of 18 right now, So we've got a couple years for them to catch up and really see what their trends are going to look like. But they do tend to gravitate towards an RTD, which is like a ready to drink cocktail in a can or something along those lines. Whereas, interestingly enough, the millennial generation really likes give me all of the components, let me blend them together. I want to make my own cocktail kits. It's just they have different expectations, wants, and needs, and adapting to that consumer is really important for any brand and honestly in any industry.
And I don't know how much it's impacting, like boomers and Gen X and that, but there have now, just recently, there were studies about any alcohol is really bad for your health. And it used to be like, have a glass of wine and that's fine. And now they're like, no, don't have any alcohol ever. And so, does that have any impact on sales?
I mean, of course, something like that does. There is a health movement that's going on right now, and at the end of the day, everyone has their vice. A lot of the young kids have the little vapes that they run around with, and some people smoke weed, and some people smoke cigarettes, and there's always the funny saying of like everything kills you. Might as well do what you like to do. So, there's always going to be consumers that are going to continue to consume, even if the volumes decrease. We definitely have seen a premiumization of products because people are drinking better and they're more cognizant of that. And I think that that's important. I think it's also creating a lot more transparency in the industry, which is great. I think transparency is the number one thing that builds trust between you and your consumer. And so I do think it forces the industry to be more cognizant of what they're, putting out there on the market. But, like I said, at the end of the day, everything gives you a little bit of a struggle and makes you age and takes a couple days off your life. I say, whatever your vice is, continue to do it. As long as you enjoy it, that's for you.
Do you think would be most surprising for us whiskey newbies, I guess, or clueless people that we would not expect to know about whiskey? I did not know barrels actually were an asset that improved with age. So there's a lot that I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. Well, a stat that kind of surprises people is how many barrels there actually are aging in Kentucky. There's more barrels aging in the state of Kentucky than there are people. There's almost
Oh,
17 million barrels aging in the state of Kentucky.
wow.
I was going
And
to ask you, Morgan, about the fact that you're in a male dominated industry.
yes.
So you're not only female, but you're also young. And so can you tell us a little bit about your experience, with those two identities in a male dominated industry?
Yeah, of course. And obviously, like engineering was the same way for me. So, still another very male dominated space. And I grew up with a really strong relationship with my dad, and he kind of instilled in me that I could do anything I wanted to and gave me a lot of confidence. And I really think that that's how you garner respect from people is with your first impression. How confident are you about what you're doing? How can you stand on your own 2 feet in this room? And I feel like I've done a really good job of that early on in my career, and it's really shown through. I don't know that I necessarily experience as much cold shoulder for being a woman as much as I do being young. I feel like the youngness is definitely something I have to prove more than, female versus male. And that may just be my experience specifically. I definitely see it out there in the world on both fronts, but that's something I kind of identify as more of a challenge for me. Because, if you just go look at my bio on LinkedIn and you see, "Oh, she's 28 years old," like, what does she really know about this?
Oh.
I understand, like, you have these predisposed notions, but have a conversation with me, and I think that mind will change pretty quick.
Do you have any like tricks of the trade of how you can come off as older or more accomplished or how you win these people over?
That's a very good question, and honestly, for me, I think it's knowing my facts. Like, I am able to handle anything that comes at me in terms of the questions that when I'm talking to an investor and they're interrogating me about things, I really have to know my stuff. At the same time, you also have to say, "You know what? I don't know that answer, and I will get back to you." So, having the confidence to admit what you don't know and to ask for help, as well as really knowing your stuff and being on top of it, and being able to confidently speak about the products that you're working with and confidently speak about your strategy, your ideas, and also having some data to back it. I got kind of lucky starting, having a company prior to my own that I could use for, talk about data points and say, here's our proven strategy here's how we started. And just sometimes just having a plan, like having a plan saying, here's what I want to do, here's what I've done, that the numbers speak for themselves at the end of the day. And as a numbers person, like I feel the same way. When I'm talking to somebody and they're also trying to gain my respect, the conversation of knowing your stuff, knowing the numbers, being able to present those confidently, I feel like that works well for me too.
And so what advice would you give like a total greenhorn who's like who is your age, or, the age you are when you went into this, 21, who I would like to go into whiskey. What would you say to them, and what tips would you give them?
I would say educate yourself as a consumer first. That is definitely the best place to start. Learn your products, learn what you like and don't like, spend some time with different whiskeys and learn about it. There's so many different avenues that you can take in the industry. You can go into like distillation and production. You can go into more of the support roles, which is where I really fit. You can go into the consumer side. You can go into the brand side, the distribution side. There's so many aspects to it. Learning the product and learning the supply chain and figuring out where you wanna sit in that is probably what I would say would be step 1, and then step 2 would be connect with people that are doing what you wanna be doing. Ask some questions. People generally want to help you, they wanna teach you, they want to pass down their knowledge and help grow other people. I guess it's just an inherently human thing, and so start asking for help is a great way to build a strong relationship with a mentor too.
So Morgan, you're quite knowledgeable. And so I'm sort of wondering, what are the top skills you think are required to do your job well?
Organization is definitely one of them. And I think problem solving skills are very important when, especially in logistics in general. You have problem, you have solution, and you have to bridge the gap between the two. And there's so many moving parts. You really have to be a good communicator. Financial knowledge as well, and I would even say negotiation. Negotiation is a skill that I think I've really learned well, and it plays a role in every aspect of my business, whether I'm negotiating a contract for my clients on their dry goods, whether I'm negotiating contracts with my investors, whether I'm negotiating contracts with our distilling partners. Again, that's a time when I really have to know my facts, know what I want, know what else is going on in the market, and keep everything very professional. So definitely would say negotiation, organization, and time management, and communication are some really big ones.
The bourbon barrel thing really got me. I was really surprised because I actually have, had a chance to do a Johnny Walker experience. Have you ever done those?
I've never done
Um
Johnny Walker, but I've done a few
Yeah,
others.
so when I was younger, I was probably 30 something, and, so the barrels, the product is sitting in there for a long time. I mean, they age for a really long time, and you're sort of like when you're warehousing them, you're babysitting them in a way, you're right? And it takes a really long time for them to mature. So I was sort of wondering, how do you stay connected to the product when it takes so long for them to, like, be out in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sampling is the simple answer. We do sampling of our products, and anytime somebody's interested in buying inventory from us, we will send them samples. And so that really helps you get an idea of the progression of your product over time. Sometimes we do it for fun, sometimes we do it for our clients, and it helps us learn more about what we're putting in the barrel as well. Like we have a mash bill from a new distillery that we started producing in 2024. And so, we tasted it at like 9 months old. Now we're getting up, almost to a year and a half old. And we're trying it throughout that because we're excited about it. And we're wondering how these flavor profiles are going to interact with each other. And, what is this going to yield? And it will continue to change as long as that product is in the barrel. So we'll continue to test it. And hopefully we'll find that sweet spot and be able to tell our customers this is when you need to take it out and
Mm.
this is what you need to put in the bottle.
Can you tell, like, 6 months from now or a year from now, it'll be ready? Or
It's all subjective, but, if we have a brand that is looking to do something specific, if they have a profile they're trying to match or if they have an age statement that they're trying to meet, we really bend to their needs and help them kinda collaborate on a plan based on their, age statement or whatever labels they're putting on their bottle specifically.
I was just sort of wondering because we're talking about a product that we're not very familiar with, and obviously a lot of people aren't. What kind of flavor profiles are you talking about? What goes into like making a good bourbon or an independent bourbon?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are 4 grains that typically go into a bourbon. It can be any combination of it. So there's corn, rye, wheat, and barley. And typically you have wheat or rye. You don't typically have both. If you have both, it's called a 4 grain, and they have those, but that's not what you think of when you think of like a traditional Kentucky bourbon. And so when you have all of them have to have at least 51% corn. You can really play with the other variables as much as you want. That's just like a legal requirement to call it bourbon. And so the rest of that other 49% you can kind of play with. And so if it's a pretty rye heavy product, typically it's a little bit more peppery and spicy, maybe even a little bit more smoky. Uh, and that element is favorable for some and it's not favorable for others. And the alternative to that is if you have this more of a weeded forward bourbon, it's got a little bit softer palate. It's got a little bit more the sweeter notes. And so typically when you talk about female whiskey drinkers, they tend to prefer that weeded profile. I personally love a traditional Kentucky bourbon. It's a 75-21-4 mash bill, so 75% corn, 21% rye, and 4% malted barley. And it's got this very rich vanilla caramel profile to it that I
Mm.
really like. I'm not a huge fan of the burn and the peppery, spicy whiskeys as much. I like a little bit calmer, a little bit more robust on the back end, deeper flavor profile than necessarily the spiciness. But you can really play around with those 4 grains to figure out what kind of flavor profile you want to develop. But all of that is done in production. So once the product is in the barrel, it's aging and you really can't change that profile unless you blend with other whiskey barrels that are of different mash bills, is what we call it.
And in the case of the barrels themselves too, obviously with wine, different types of barrels are used. They're made of different kinds of materials. Does that also affect the whiskey too if you use different types of materials?
Yes, it definitely does, and I like to say barrels are like snowflakes, no 2 are the same because even if you have a barrel that you take and you cut out of the exact same tree, the odds that it's going to be the exact same are very, very slim. The grooves are gonna be different, everything about that barrel is gonna be slightly different, and so that's where you get into, like, the craft versus these large, massive batch products is when you're working with craft, there's always gonna be a little variation between the different runs or SKUs that they make because your sample size is smaller. Whereas when you are putting hundreds of barrels into a vat at the same time, you can really smooth out that profile better than you
Mm.
can with 8 barrels or 10 barrels. Now you can definitely get consistency, and it's a lot of sensory based lab work, but really, you only get that consistency with the larger scale, and so that's what I think makes craft so fun and unique is that it's a little bit of every single time you try this product, it's going to be slightly different.
And what would you say, for yourself, if you were going to start all over again and you're a 21-year-old kid, what would you say to your younger self?
Honestly, I would say that I think I did a good job, and I think that the oblivion that I had at that time was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Like, I didn't understand the hurdles I was gonna experience. I didn't understand the challenges that I was going to face, and that, I think, gave me this confidence that I may not have had if I would have gone out and done all this research. I feel like I knew enough to be dangerous and enough to keep taking that next step, and then the path just started to unfold in front of me. So maybe I would go with trust yourself, trust your instincts, and trust what you're going if you don't believe in it, no one else is going to. You need to believe in what you're doing more than anyone else, and as long as you can stay in that mindset, you're gonna achieve all the dreams you could imagine.
I've just found it really fascinating to learn a little bit. I mean, I've had a little bit of experience having had some bourbon in the past. It's not my favorite drink, but I think the industry in particular is very interesting, and I'm so grateful that you were able to share your story, particularly such a young person and being so successful.
No, I
So,
appreciate that.
yes, it's been great to talk to you, Morgan, and continued luck with your liquid assets.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it. It was great to chat with you ladies.
So she was kind of a amalgam of different roles,
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
kind of a hybrid made up type
Yeah.
of job, like, as an entrepreneur. I guess you as an entrepreneur, you do a lot of different things too,
Mhm.
but I think if I understand it correctly, because she has 2 different companies, and one is really about investing in, whiskey brands, like independent whiskey brands, and then helping them promote themselves, and
Yeah,
at the same time, also helping to manage the inventory
yeah.
by storing the
Sure, yeah,
barrels that have to age over time.
right. Which initially, I think it was just storage, and then she kind of grew it to be a couple of different things.
Yeah. I mean, I think anybody who would, like, think about this as a potential path, because she didn't start out that way. It's not like she
Right.
planned it, which is also kind of interesting because she's so young. But I
Yes.
think for somebody who's thinking about this, they can either know that they're gonna go and do whiskey because they like the product, or they like the type of business, and so they see opportunity based on the skill sets they have. So, um yeah, her age really surprised me, but she was listed as a Forbes 30 under 30, and
Yeah,
so she definitely has built a reputation, and I think that speaks volumes to the
yeah.
type of person and, drive that she has.
Mhm.
So I think it's kind of important, and I think it's just really critical for somebody who's also an entrepreneur.
Yes. Although what I thought was interesting is she makes pretty good money, probably.
Yeah, I think, like, if you're an asset manager, and I think that's kind of where I sort of focused when I was doing my research about it, is that, her engineering background, I think, helps a lot because she can be good with numbers and logical thinking and very disciplined, especially since she was a civil engineer. But I think it's more like if you are into finance and investment, then you can go into this industry. You just have to understand the industry
Yeah.
because beverages is a commodity, if you will. And so I think I found out that this is more like an alternative asset management
Mhm.
arena. And
Yeah.
so it's not like you're doing stocks and bonds and, hedge funds and stuff like that, but there are certain elements of it that I think you have to understand. So she talked about a lot on the financials and
Mhm.
really learning the financials and learning deep within the business to then be able to speak intelligently, partially because of her age. You
Yeah.
know, if she walks in a room and she has all her numbers and she understands, like, what the investors are looking for in terms of they're on the same page, then she has credibility right away.
Yeah, and what I also thought was interesting is, income is tied to barrel performance, and I'm like, "Oh, so you not only have to know your numbers, but you have to drink this stuff and know what's good," which I could not, but good for her.
Yeah, I'm not a big bourbon, fan,
No, no.
but I think it just speaks more to if you wanna be doing some of these types of industries, you have to really know your industry, which means you
Yeah,
also have to know the product. And so that means you're gonna have to understand the ins and outs and a lot of different other things. But
yeah.
I was really impressed. by
Yeah.
sort of like her focus. And so
Yes.
that was really neat.
Yeah. And you can drink bourbon.
Thanks for joining us today. That's what she does, and maybe what you could do too. If you like what you heard, make sure you follow What She Does wherever you get your podcasts.